Good morning and welcome to our session today, which is on have your career priorities shifted? And we're also going to be exploring some personal career journeys. What we're going to do with you today is, I think anecdotally, everyone has become aware that people are feeling differently about their careers. I think the amount of people that we have joining the session with us today, you're probably in that mindset where you're thinking about what your career might look like in the future, what your relationship with work might look like in the future. And so what we wanted to do with you today is have a discussion around that and come at it from a few different perspectives to give you some food for thought, take some feedback from you, and hopefully help you in thinking about what comes next for you. So you'll see that I'm not the only person on the panel with us this morning. So I'm going to start by introducing my colleagues. So you'll see that we have Barak here. Barak is our Managing Director for our Workforce Solutions business at LHH here in the UK. And then my colleague Nigel is with us as well. And Nigel is one of our key account directors for LHH in the UK. My name is Caris Law, and I am an enterprise sales director here in the UK. So let me just quickly take you through our agenda for this morning. What we're going to work through, and as I said just at the outset, we'd like to take you through thinking about career journeys and career priorities in the context, from a couple of perspectives. So first, we're going to talk to you a little bit about the research. So the macro picture, and we're going to do that in the context of pre-pandemic, or BC as I've heard it referred to, before COVID. So what the research was telling us about people's relationship with their careers and their work and what their expectations were in advance of the pandemic. And then we're going to take you just quickly through some research that the Adecco Group has commissioned during the pandemic, just to show where those differences are. The other perspective that we want to sort of talk to you about it is very much from a human perspective. And to that end, myself, Barak, and Nigel are going to share some human stories with you about our own careers and our own personal career journeys. I'll talk to you about how my career has been shaped to a certain degree around some life-changing events. And Barak is going to talk a little bit about, the mindset of making a conscious change to your career. And then Nigel is going to talk us through, really completely reinventing himself. You'll see that we've got a Q&A chat running. What we're going to do is probably break after each of those sessions and respond hopefully to the questions that you've got in the chat. And any feedback, comments, we really want to engage with you. Sadly, the group that we've got is too big for us to be able to do that conversationally, but we hope that you feel that you can contribute through the chat functionality. So let's start a little bit with the research. And I think to start with, Barak is going to share with us some research that he was very closely involved with pre-pandemic around people's work expectations and what people wanted from their careers and expected from their careers. So I'll hand over to you, Barak, for now.
Thank you, Caris, and very happy to meet you, everyone. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of our stories and research around careers. This is a study that I will talk about from before pandemic. It's actually from 2015. I published this research in 2015 at MIT Sloan Management Review. And back then, what we looked at was what high potential young managers wanted in their careers. So actually, this is a little bit about everybody in organizations. Based on our research, we found that actually most people wanted the same things. But some of the things that I will mention are actually quite particularly important for people in the first half of their career, more or less. So what did they want in 2015? There is some new research that came out in the past 6 months or so that I have seen that confirmed almost the same points here, but One thing that was very clear from our research was we did a research study with different data sources. We looked at a group of international exec MBA graduates across the world. We looked at a hypo group in Germany that really was member of a specific group that were identified as high potentials with higher education degrees, etc. And then we looked at a group of people from different industries that we had qualitative assessments that confirmed our quantitative findings. So one of the most significant findings in our research, based on the surveys we ran with the different populations, was that employees were looking for development opportunities, but employers were not necessarily providing them enough. And the development opportunities that we saw were given in general in most organizations were some sort of development programs, and those high potential employees thought they were not enough. And the other bit that was very interesting is actually what mattered in terms of people's commitment to being with their organization was really about 2 points related to development. One is being able to take high stakes assignments, which we call basically the types of projects that had high visibility from the top of the organization, that had strategic importance for the business, etc. Most young people, or let's say early career people, weren't given these opportunities until they became senior level employees in organizations. And that basically creates an environment where you don't train anybody to make decisions, strategic decisions, take risk or anything until they become a director or something. And then when they become a senior person, they haven't built the muscles to really lead the organization in a better way. So that's basically bad for the organization, but also bad for the employee, because also our generation, Gen Y and onwards, have seen lots of examples of people in their 20s, even like or 30s, leading really large organizations. And if you think of Facebook, Twitter, Google types of organizations emerging, and a lot of their leaders being relatively young, that actually showed the talented group in the world that actually they can create those high stake assignments. They can work on bigger things. If they don't get them in their organization, they will be willing to change. And then another element of development opportunity was around access to senior management and coaching, mentoring opportunities, which we thought, which our respondents thought that they weren't getting enough. Then we looked at it, especially when we tried to confirm our findings qualitatively with our qualitative part of the research. We found 3 things that mattered to people when they changed their jobs. And those 3 things were not in addition to the development opportunities, advancement opportunities. Those 3 things were more around the soft side of the business. We call it soft side. It's actually in the careers literature, they are around subjective, they are classified as subjective or objective career success measures. And these were all related to subjective success measures, meaning things that make people feel they are enjoying their careers and they are successful in their careers. So those were the 3 things that you see on the slide: meaningful work, genuine connections, and flow of experience. What do we mean by meaningful work? Meaningful work was really about being part of a purposeful organization, which is becoming really popular these days as well, very important in the business world, but also seeing the impact of your work on others. Some of you might have seen Adam Grant's research from 2007 when he studied what makes a call center that collects funds for a university's scholarship fund more effective. They trialed so many different things to see if different types of leadership interventions could help improve their their success. Most of those interventions didn't work. But one thing that worked was that they brought every month for 5 minutes, they brought a student who benefited from the work of that call center employees, basically someone who got the scholarship to study at a top university in the US. And they came and they shared their stories. They shared how grateful they were. And that type of interaction with the beneficiary of their work made people a lot more effective in their work. Just 5 minutes interaction actually increased the amount of sales those employees made by about 300 or 400%. So there was a huge impact on that. And again, we see this is part of the business world that we value a lot more these days as well. Second, genuine connections, especially the relationship with your line manager and immediate team. There is a saying I'm sure must have heard, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. It is really true when it comes to personal relationship. If your manager asks you a personal question without any bad intention behind or ulterior motive, just a personal question like, how was your son's football game yesterday? How did the concert go last week? Things like that, just to be curious about you as a person rather than as a business connection. That actually is shown to influence the satisfaction ratings of employees. So this is basically what we are talking about here, and there might be different ways to improve this as well. And last point is the flow experience. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, one of the pioneers in positive psychology, who passed away actually last week, came up with this concept of flow, which is around being in the zone. How much are you lost when you are actually doing some type of work? You are basically lost so much, you're so concentrated, you are in the zone and you are enjoying every moment. You don't even know how the time passes. Having those flow experiences at work, the amount of flow experiences at work you have is directly related to your satisfaction and commitment to your job and your organization. And one thing around this that organizations can do is around balancing the challenge with the capability of the individual. Meaning, if somebody is given challenges that are really way above their capability level, that might overwhelm and stress them. If they are given challenges that are below their capability level, that might make them bored. So finding the right balance, giving people enough challenges and pushing their limits a bit, but not overwhelming them is what is the core of creating flow experiences. And another element about creating flow is using strength at work. You might have joined the earlier session today about strength. I won't go into detail, but that really actually does create the flow experience. So one more concept I want to share around this, as we are going to talk about career shifts, we thought we would talk about what makes people change career. And then in relation to the first point here, I wanted to introduce this concept. I'm sure most of you have seen this before. It's the S-curve concept we will quickly look at. If you have seen Whitney Johnson's work, the book she published called Disrupt Yourself, this is really about what makes people disrupt themselves and think about changing their careers. In the S-curve basically shows how we actually evolve in our performance and learning. There is always a launch point when you're trying a new career, a new job, something new for us, which is exciting, which helps us actually learn things. We are growing very quickly in that point. And then we move to a sweet spot where our performance is really, really going up fast, and we are really enjoying learning the work, and also we feel comfortable at what we do. And then eventually we evolve to a level of mastery over time. And at the level of mastery, you see the curve goes towards more stabilizing. After too much time in mastery, we actually stop growing. And the idea of the Disrupt Yourself book is really when you come towards the linear, more stable part of your mastery, you need to start some new S-curves for your life. And that's when you disrupt yourself, and your odds of success can be as high as 6 times more than otherwise if you stay in the S-curve rather than starting a new S-curve. So I wanted to share this concept as well, because this was also a lot of the time what in our research came as the answer when people said, I wasn't growing anymore. And this is actually when they felt they came to the mastery level and they need a new challenge. Anyhow, I'll stop here. This is basically what we thought was the reason that people reconsidered their careers before pandemic. Obviously, we have a view on what happened after pandemic. So I'll pass to Karis to talk about that.
Thanks, Barak. That was great. So let's bring that right up to date with a survey that our parent company, the Adecco Group, commissioned earlier this year. So carried out sort of May, June 2021, really with a view to really understand what people wanted from the new world of work, both so that we can support our clients and customers, but also to just really help quantify some of that anecdotal general feeling in the market that, you know, everyone is reevaluating their careers. So it was really about finding out exactly what does that mean and what does that look like. It was a very extensive survey, 25 countries, 15,000 almost respondents, and the age group between 18 and 60, and all white collar workers. So pretty chunky bit of data for us to be able to take a look at. And there were 5 core themes that came out of the research. I think if you work in HR, none of these will necessarily be a huge surprise to you, but I think it's useful to have some data around it. And what I would say as well is that we can share this survey, a link to this survey with you after today. The first thing is, again, this won't be a surprise to anybody, but hybrid working was a very, very strong theme that came out. The test as to whether, you know, productivity wanes for white collar workers when working on a hybrid basis has been passed. Hybrid working has really boosted equal opportunities. So we find that people with families, people with disabilities, and people from diverse backgrounds are able to contribute more when organisations can accommodate hybrid working. People do want to go back to the office or back to collaborate and connect, but I think it's very much on their own terms. So the research tells us it's absolutely, you know, on their own terms. So organisations need to really start thinking about that and how they glean from their employees what they need. The second real big trend that came through was that the shorter working week is in demand, linked to that flexibility and linked to hybrid working. People want to work for you know, a shorter working week and really build more of an outcomes-based working culture rather than a presenteeism based working culture. So again, lots of food for thought for organisations as to how they accommodate that. We ran a session yesterday, which was recorded. I'm not sure if you were, or perhaps you were able to attend, but the other thing that came through quite worryingly is that actually burnout might be the next worker pandemic, and that organisations need to really think about and should shoulder the responsibility of their employee well-being. Our survey actually showed that this spans all age groups and gender. So, you know, and the other worrying sign is that quite often leaders aren't able to recognise when the signs of burnout are coming out. So, you know, again, some really, really important touch points there and kind of pointers to what organisations and indeed leaders need to think about. Building on from that, you know, there is this sort of disconnect with leadership. It is very difficult. I think in the start of the pandemic, you know, certainly anecdotally, if we think about it into LHH terms, we actually saw engagement go up. as organisations sort of responded really well. You know, we're accommodating, facilitated people being able to work from home and accommodating some more of that flexibility. Now, over time, what's happened is that kind of manager-employee relationship is deteriorated. It's harder to maintain in a virtual and remote environment, and motivation is struggling. So, and again, in some instances, the research tells us that leaders aren't really understanding that disconnect. So we really need to think about how we reconnect leaders with their teams to, you know, increase engagement and to, you know, increase that motivation and keep employees happier, I guess. And then the last point, and this is really what we wanted to talk about today. So what the survey is telling us is that actually the mass resignation that's been quite widely reported may be overstating the fact. And, you know, we may not see a mass exodus, but the research would tell us that we are absolutely seeing a mass reevaluation. You know, half of workers are disengaged, potentially dissatisfied with their career prospects. We know that organisations are going to start hiring again, and they already are. You know, the vacancy level, certainly in the UK at the moment, is at an all-time high. So the risk, the flight risk for people within organisations of losing talent is really high. So, you know, people really are thinking about their career options and really considering things in a very different light to they may have been pre-pandemic. So that's why we wanted to kind of bring this to life a little bit about today and sort of talk about how we have reevaluated the various stages of our careers. What's interesting is that in terms of the research, what it was able to tell us was there are a number of ways in which people are reevaluating their careers and their priorities from a workplace perspective. So it might be looking at it from a qualification perspective, maybe looking to a different job with more flexible career options, changing careers altogether. And what you can see here on the data is that we've got some, you know, there's some really significant percentages of people who are certainly considering it, or indeed have already done that. Reducing the number of days a week that they work, or actually leaving the workforce altogether and doing something completely different. The other thing that research told us was that actually from an age perspective, and I think this also links back a little bit to the expectations within Barak's research when we were looking at people in the early stages of their career, is that from a demographic point of view, Generation Z are actually the proportion of people within that demographic group is much higher in terms of the people that are considering their options. So you can see here, you know, when we look at it across various age demographics, and you can see that the percentages of people who are thinking about this are much higher according to our research. The other thing that was really interesting is that at this stage of the research, there's no indication that there's a difference between the genders. This is a wholesale reevaluation. Men and women are thinking about their careers in exactly the same way. And so there's no difference. There was certainly some research at the outset of the pandemic, and it was widely publicised that, you know, women were struggling more, you know, particularly working mothers were struggling a little bit more because they were having more burden in terms of homeschooling, caring responsibilities, you know, that came through. But in terms of the impact and what we see coming out of it, it suggests that there isn't a difference across those 5 areas within the genders. So that's a little bit about the research. We're now going to go into, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second, and we're now going to start to talk about our personal stories, which is a bit I'm dreading, to be fair. And then, but before we do that, and actually I also want to mention something that I didn't mention at the outset, is that we have our very capable producer on the line, Iona, today, who is supporting us and helping technophobes like me to make everything run smoothly. But what we wanted to do was to do a quick poll. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we'll do a quick poll of how, to what extent that you are actually reevaluating your role in your career, and sort of give us an indication of how people are feeling within the group. Do we think we've had enough time for people to respond?
Yep, we've got most people.
Thanks, Iona. So what we can see there is that actually, a very significant proportion, over 60%, are either seriously or evaluated. So on that scale, I guess that's potentially one of the reasons people come onto this call, is to sort of explore that in more detail. But really interesting to see that there's a really significant proportion of people in there. We've also had a quick question, and I'm not sure what you would, I don't know, Barak, perhaps if you can help respond. We've had a question just now before we go on to the next bit around whether we think that the research has shown in terms of reevaluation is significantly different to what we might have found 10 years ago.
I think 10 years ago is probably hard to know, but I would definitely say it's a significant shift from 20 years ago, when people thought careers are linear and they stay in the same job in the same company possibly for a long time. It has really become, I think in the last 10 years, we have really seen this increase. Also, my research also showed that people don't see that their career is linear anymore, and they don't see their career in one organization anymore. I think in comparison to 10 years though, my guess, I mean, obviously I don't really have the exact comparison in terms of the research findings on this, but my guess is that 10 years ago, what started changing was that people started to think they can move across jobs. So I remember like 20 years ago or so, when I was just starting my career and I was asking people about the career advice, they would say, oh, don't change jobs in the next 2-3 years, because if you keep changing and if you stayed with an employer less than 2 years, it's really bad in your resume. And when I studied this 10 years ago, actually it wasn't the case. What I found was people who change jobs more often, especially in the early stages of their career, who changed companies, let's say it that way, they would be actually not penalized, but they would be rewarded in terms of compensation and the career levels they can achieve within that time frame. So basically changing employers became quite popular already 10 years ago, and it started to become like a normal consideration. But I think what I guess is changing now is that it's not about changing employers only, it's about changing your career fully. Having the opportunity, also the trends support this, right? More organizations are giving flexible working options. More organizations are open to people working half-time or so. The portfolio career options are becoming more and more possible and accepted in the society. So in that sense, I would say there is a definitely uptick in the reassessment of the careers based on what I can feel on this. But in terms of changing jobs, it might be similar. So hope I was able to answer that, Sally.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Barak. That was great. So let's start talking about some personal stories then. And I'm going to start off. And what we wanted to do was just to give 3 different perspectives, not related to the pandemic, but related to changes in our careers, our reflections on it, and what the impact was at the time. For me, it's billed as, life-changing events shaping my career, which is absolutely accurate. But I think sometimes when you think about life-changing events, you think of those events as being something that's quite unusual, potentially, and quite unexpected. And there were a couple of events in my life or my career that happened, but certainly the first one was wasn't unexpected, it was very much expected, and it wasn't unusual. It was, the most natural thing in the world, quite honestly. But those of you, I'm sure many of you have been through it, will know that it is absolutely life-changing. And of course, I'm talking about having a family and having my daughter. So just to give you I suppose I'll give you a quick snapshot of my career. I'm currently working at LHH as an enterprise sales director. I started my career many moons ago, and I would definitely describe my career as being a squiggly career. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the TED Talks around that, but there's always been a common thread. I started my career in HR, operational HR, and I worked at power stations during the 90s. I had about 9 years working in HR roles within the power generation sector. Very male dominated, very challenging at times, but interesting and varied and great work. And I, as I say, I always describe that almost as my first career. And I had a fairly, being honest, I wasn't particularly ambitious, but I had a fairly standard progression during my career and was promoted a couple of times during the time that I was there. And then I suppose as I approached my 30s, I thought to myself, actually, I'm going to do something a little bit different, and decided to relocate down to London. And that was the first trigger for me in terms of a career change. And again, I registered with a number of recruitment agencies, and essentially I was offered a couple of roles to work at recruitment agencies as a recruiter for HR professionals. And I thought, well, you know, I'll do it. I'll find myself a role, and you know, that'll be great. But to be honest, sales actually, and it was something I'd never realized, but sales and working with different clients and working with different people and helping people find work, it really sparked something in me that I didn't even know was there. And all of a sudden I had a really high level of ambition and drive. I felt completely different about my working environment. It was obviously quite performance related, and I enjoyed that very much. And I think I always think of that really as the trajectory that I went through in terms of progression. And I did that for close to 10 years, and I progressed every 2 years. I started off as an individual contributor, and then I ran a team, and then I ran a region, and then I ran a bigger region, and ultimately I was operations director, and I had you know, 50 or 60 consultants working with me. I was working very happily a 60-70 hour week. I was traveling frequently, and yeah, I mean, I guess a very traditional, you know, sales trajectory, if you like. It was at that point I decided it was time to have a family, probably a little bit later than some might have thought. But in all honesty, I had no idea. At that point, I just didn't think it would change anything. So when I did become pregnant with my daughter, I spoke to my manager and I said, look, you know, I'm going to take 3 months off. I'm going to get a nanny. I'll be back full time. Everything's going to be as you were. Everything's going to be, you know, the same. And of course it wasn't. And I think there are parallels to the experience that I went through, albeit which was very, very sudden for me. I mean, I must confess that, and I'm actually quite ashamed to say it now, but I was, you know, a couple of weeks before my due date, I worked almost right up until she was a little bit early. So it was literally, there was days in it, you know, weeks before I was traveling up to Leeds. I was actually on my BlackBerry when I was in hospital, waiting for her to arrive. But I think there are parallels to how my mindset changed to how everyone's mindset has changed as part of the pandemic. I feel a little bit like, you know, everyone uniformly has been through this life-changing event, and it does change you. Now, when I talk about my personal experience, it was almost like a lightning bolt. You know, the day she was born, I thought I was going to go back to work in 3 months. Within 2 weeks, I knew that wasn't going to happen. And I actually took a year off on maternity. I actually never went back to my old job. I took a different job. I'd been headhunted by another firm, and I went 4 days a week. I went back to individual contributor, and my whole sphere changed, and I changed as a person. And I think not everyone does. Some people come into it and they come out of it feeling exactly the same thing. And I think that will be the same for the pandemic. Some people will come into it and it won't change them, but others will come into it and come out of it, and they will be significantly different. So I actually then, as I say, completely turned everything on its head, took a big step back actually. And I'll reflect on that when I just sort of close, but I took a big step back at that point. But over time, what I found was I changed roles again because I was still working in central London and I didn't want to. And at that time, this is 10 years ago, I didn't have a lot of flexibility in terms of working from home. And I realized that actually a 3-hour commute with a small child is just dead time. So I found a role more locally and ended up working within talent assessment. So moved away from recruitment. But over the years then, when I started to change, I felt that, yes, I had absolutely done the right thing. But then I did, I was still, there was still a core of the same person. I still wanted a challenging role. I still actually wanted to get back into leadership, but it took some time for me to realize and actually to be able to build the confidence to realize that I could still do that. And so over time, over the sort of 5, 6, 7 years after I had Ellen, I then moved into a leadership role again and started, working through that again. The postscript almost to this is that I was very happily working for a talent assessment business. I was in a leadership role. I was leading the strategic key accounts team, enjoying myself. And then I decided to take another risk or take a risk. I'm quite risk averse generally, and move into join a colleague who had gone and former manager who had gone to co-set up a startup business. And I did that for a year. That was an amazing experience. Learned so much, just fascinating. But unfortunately, very suddenly, almost violently, well, not quite violently, literally, but it was a very, very quick process. That startup went wrong, and what happened was at the senior end, in terms of the founders and the chief exec, there was a disagreement, which meant that everyone who had been hired by that person was also exited. So really, really quickly, I was back in the employment market. I'd lost my job. That had never happened to me before. I didn't know what to do. And what was interesting was that I actually found that I went back to my maternity level where I thought, right, I'm going to go back. I'm going to take another step back. I'm going to go back. I'm going to be an individual contributor. I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to go with the safe option. And thankfully, that was the point at which I joined LHH. LHH, I felt, there's a sense of purpose here because obviously we help people who lose their jobs, and I felt really, really aligned in terms of personal values with that. But also, the role I got was great. What I did find this time though was that the bounce back was much quicker. I had an amazing manager when I first started, Clinton, and actually within 6 months, a leadership role came up. And he incredibly generously spoke to me about it and said, look, with your experience and background, you should really go for this. And I was really lucky. I went through a process and I secured a leadership role. So I'm almost back again. So I guess my reflections on this, there's a couple of reflections that I think that I got this was, for that first kind of life-changing moment when I was on maternity, I think today, I think I probably could have had a little bit more of my cake and eat it. And I think that, I could have possibly still maintained what was quite a senior role, but with more flexibility. And at the time, I just didn't think that was possible. And what that did then mean was that I lost confidence quite a bit. I think second time around, I'm now realizing that actually it's perfectly sustainable. And in fact, it should be something that we all strive for, to be able to be, authentic, genuine leaders in roles, but also have that balance and have that flexibility. And I think that's what the pandemic is showing us, is that actually across, regardless of your gender, regardless whether you're a working mum, a working dad, you need to be, you should be able to have that balance. And for it to work for everyone has to have the balance. So that's my little story. I don't know if anyone's got any questions to ask. I'm really happy to take any questions if you have any. I appreciate I've kind of ploughed through it very, very quickly, but yeah, really, really happy to take questions.
Terry,
I've had
since no one has questions, I have a number of questions. It was very interesting story. Thanks for sharing that. One question, did you ever regret any of the changes?
So I think in some way you can't regret anything really, can you? You know, I mean, I am where I am today, and I'm really happy, and I'm enjoying my work. So I think regret is a kind of a relative term. I do think that if I was coaching someone now who was going through this process, or either going through maternity or had lost their job and lost their confidence, I would definitely encourage them to not necessarily think that there isn't a midway ground. And I think, I probably could have done a role or a leadership role and had that balance. And it took me, 2 or 3 years to get back to that, possibly even longer, actually, probably 4 or 5 years to get back to that. Whereas actually, I think I could have had that balance. And I think the other reflection I was going to mention actually is that in terms of kind of when we think about hiring talent and looking at talent, I think sometimes there's a really overused term of somebody being overqualified for a role. I think it's really important, if I was hiring in now, so there's 2 things. If I was coaching someone, I would definitely encourage them to think about, how they, what they want, what they really want, what they really need, and what they really want, and not necessarily take that huge step back because they feel they should. But I also think if I was hiring now, and if I did get a CV through that looked really overqualified, I think, I do explore it, because people have different reasons for looking at different things. And I think sometimes you can be in a fantastic position, you can recruit someone with lots and lots of experience who's really happy to be doing that role that they're doing. But a question in from Lisa, what did you do to build your confidence? I think, look, over time, I think my confidence was rebuilt over time. And it was the sorts of things that I did was that, initially I sort of almost battened down the hatches in both scenarios, but I did it for much longer post-maternity. But I think what I started to do was to really start to push myself out of my comfort zone. And when I was in the talent business, when I first returned to work, I started to volunteer for various projects that were happening internally. I started to be a little bit more forthright in meetings and just start to kind of test the ground a little bit. And then I was really lucky, and I got involved in a particular project that we were doing there, where I had quite a lot of exposure to some of the leadership internally. And the kind of the tables turned a little bit. I felt actually I haven't lost any of the abilities that I had. What I've lost is my confidence. And I think, over time, you start looking and start having discussions with people, and more business discussions, and you think, well, I did that. I did it, it's a long time ago, but I know how to do that. And I think it was just time. I think in LHH, that happened a lot quicker. Because I think once I'd actually, because I think when I first started, I was almost getting over the trauma that I'd had from the event that had happened with the startup. And I think once I was over that, I felt quite quickly then that I got up to speed. Another question: how can we change the mindset of? How can we change the mindset? Sorry. How can we change the mindset of leadership teams to be more supportive of employees during changing moments? I think, thank you, Emma. I think sharing, I think like anything, I think we have to, there are obviously, I think sometimes, there's things like keep in touch days, which are fine, but I think, do we really encourage people to keep in touch? I also think sharing stories internally is really super important. I think, as I said at the outset, my story is not unusual. It's vast majority of organizations will have women in leadership that have gone through this process. So I think we need to be open about it and need to share it. I think when you've gone through it, your perspective on it is completely different. So So my thoughts, my answer to that is really to encourage sharing those stories so that people feel okay to talk about how they're feeling. And then you can encourage that sort of line manager conversation and build that confidence.
Sally, sorry, Karis, I'm being Sally. Sally wrote a comment. May I jump in on that as well?
Yeah.
Very similar question to Emma's question, I think. As we know, a lot of those organizations that we work for value competitiveness a lot more than other things sometimes, and they really push for that that in terms of their expectations from employees. However, as we also discussed in the yesterday's seminar, I think there was a lot of references to the values, how we match our values in the organization's value with the organizational values. And if that is not matching, that really creates that tension, and we over time feel burnt out. And there are lots of cases. It's not only becoming a mother or father, but it's also menopause, illness, grief, all those things happening. How do we really move that perspective of managers away from that constant competitive and that pressure? Is the question, which is very similar to the one you answered. I think one aspect I really believe organizations start seeing or need to see is the personalization of the experience. Employees are not only demanding, they are also changing the road of work right now, that we need to give them personalized attention as leaders. And this is, how to do that, how to change the leader's mindset towards that is not easy, but a lot of the leadership development interventions we do are these days focused on those, like really coaching them, group coaching, team coaching, or really running workshops specifically focused on personalizing the managerial style to people's needs. But in addition to that, I think Karis's point is really important here. We need to share more of these stories. I think a lot of leaders who are at those senior levels who went through something like Karis went through do not share those. They hide these stories rather than share them actively. They hide them in a way as if they were always in that competitive edge, always pushing for it. And because that is still what is rewarded in organizations. I think the more we share the stories as leaders ourselves, and the more we encourage those stories to be shared, then it will help also changing perspective.
I think the concept you talk a lot, when I hear you talk to clients a lot, Barak, is around psychological safety.
Yeah.
And I think that is in all sorts of, if you think about inclusion and belonging, and this is all part of the same conversation, that people feel happy to bring themselves to work and their personal experiences to work. And the more you share, the more you get that. Just a couple more questions before we move on to our next story. Is it ever okay to plateau and focus on non-work life instead? My response would be, if you're happy, then yes. I think that's the other thing about this. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of managing your career. It's very much about thinking about what you need and what you want, and what makes you feel fulfilled. I don't know, Barak, if you've got, Nadia, if you've got any comment on that at all.
Absolutely. I think it is a different perspective. In reality, there is never a plateau. Let's suppose you stopped doing your job, but actually you started a new S-curve, you are not even aware of it, right? You started spending more time at home and cooking, like developing that S-curve, or maybe you started to socialize more, develop like relational skills. Whatever you do, life is going on. So I actually don't like that term plateau in careers, because anything we experience adds to our experience, and that experiences shape us as people, right? Anyhow, I don't know if you've seen this new book called Visual Leadership from Todd Church. It's a very interesting one, and he describes something that I really love. He says wisdom is when you have knowledge intersecting with experience. So the intersection of knowledge and experience is wisdom. I think as long as we live, if we are living a good life, unless we're just stopping life somehow, we are developing wisdom, and that's priceless. The challenge, obviously, in the plateau time is to be aware of that when we are feeling like we're actually plateauing in our career, actually we are evolving. As long as we can persuade ourselves about it, then we are actually going up, not in the plateau. That would be my
I would
answer.
add, there's a lot of, I've read and heard a lot of people talking about the conventional work, study, retire at 65 model. And, you know, people shift and do something else, you know, being a brilliant mum or a brilliant dad or a brilliant carer. It means that you're not doing that conventional work role, then that could be very fulfilling as well. So I think, yes, it is okay.
Yeah.
And Ellen shared a nice note on sharing stories from ground up also to help drive that mindset. Absolutely. I think that's such a good idea. And actually, we know these days changes don't happen top down in organizations. We need to really create this whole movement across the board in organizations if we want to change. And when I said we need to share stories as leaders, by the way, I didn't mean top down as leaders. We are all leaders at all levels, right? So that's a really great point. And Sally says this has given her an aha moment. Thank you, Sally, too, for that.
Thank you. So let's before we move on to Barak's changing mindset story, let's have another quick poll. So question here is, if you found a job identical to your current one with more flexibility, would you take it? So let's have a half a minute or a minute just to respond to that. Perfect. It's a couple of minutes for a couple more respondents. So I think, so that interestingly, only a couple of people or you know, a lower percentage of people saying it was very, very unlikely that they would take it. But, you know, certainly the highest proportion of people likely and very likely. So, and I guess why wouldn't you, to a certain degree? However, we're going to hear from Barak now about his mindset change and his career change, which actually meant he really did lose a lot of the flexibility that he had previously. So let's hear from him around that.
Yeah, I guess I was ready to lose flexibility at some point, but let me quickly go over my career story with you. The point Karis made about losing flexibility is actually I at some point in my career I decided to move from academia to consulting. As you can imagine, the consulting world has been a lot more challenging and busy and less flexible than academia. But my story is I am originally from Turkey. I started in my career there in the HR world in FMCG sector, doing recruitment, training, etc. I always loved HR area, people area, and I have actually always stayed in that area in my career since the beginning, yet changing the type of career I had in terms of the occupation and within that expertise area. And after HR, I did some, I was very focused during even university years. I was doing a lot of personal development focused activities. I was reading Tony Robbins type of experts, just trying to understand how I can improve myself. I got into coaching. I was one of the earlier people in the country trained in neurolinguistic programming. I started doing some training consultancy part-time while because I had developed so many skills in that area as well. So this was still early stage in my career. I was happy with the things I was learning and trying and experiencing, yet I felt I needed some different challenge. And that's when I decided that I wanted to go into either consulting or study these topics even deeper. So I thought, because consulting, I would still work on people topics. I would do consulting in people strategy areas, because they constantly solve problems. So I thought I should go either into consulting or study these topics even deeper. And I decided to try both. I applied for consulting jobs. I applied for graduate programs. And I was clear I wanted to do whatever my next step is in a different country. I didn't know which country it was. My undergrad degree was delivered in English and I was in Turkey. So I had already English language skills. I thought, why not learn a different language, go somewhere else? So eventually I went to Spain for my PhD in organizational behavior and HR. It was a lovely experience and a great place to be. And before I finished my PhD, I spent a year in Philadelphia in the US, working with some of the gurus in talent management area that I wanted to spend time with for my research. And then when I came back to Spain and finished my PhD, already about 10 months before I submitted my final version of my PhD, I had some job opportunities in academia. And it was a time actually I was reevaluating whether I want to stay in academia or I want to become a consultant now or not. So consulting was always in my mind, but I also felt driven because there are so many things I did for my academic research that I still wanted to continue. I still wanted to publish my research. I still wanted to learn. I was learning a lot. I think that S-curve thing was still in the sweet spot. I wasn't in the mastery yet. So I thought, why not? I should evaluate academic opportunities. Long story short, I took a job offer in France at a business school as a faculty member. Went there, and for those of you who know, in the academic world, especially in American style business schools, there is this tenure track. Basically, people are trying to prove themselves until they publish their research enough and they publish good quality research that at some point when they prove themselves, their organizations offer them the tenure, which means you basically have job security for life, more or less. That tenure track is designed to protect academic freedom and thinking so that people can spend their time in not only just publishing something, but maybe developing new ideas, etc. So basically, when you come to the mastery level in academia, they give you that tenure, which is what all academics strive for. And after that, they start being more free in terms of what they focus on for their research. Anyhow, so I came to that level in academia in a very short time frame, in 4 years after I moved to France, which was quite an achievement. And in academic world, it was a good place to be. Everybody would be celebrating it and then enjoy it. But at that point, I felt like I need to actually I need to change my careers. I'm at the mastery level and not learning more. And what should I do? Was the question again. And I realized a lot of my research topics were related to what companies are doing, but I wasn't involved in supporting those companies. So I thought, okay, I'll go to consulting. And obviously the consulting option was a clear option, but the biggest challenge in that shift was not in the shift in the career, but in my mindset. That is the part that took me a while. It took me 6 to 8 months at least, if not more. When I was in academia, I was trained to be an expert in one single topic. And that was for me the executive careers and talent management topic. That was my area of research. if somebody asked me about leadership, if somebody asked me about performance management, if somebody asked me about recruitment or any other HR related topic, I would say, no, I'm not an expert in that, because I wasn't necessarily doing all my research in that specific topic. Although I was teaching those topics at the business school, that's the irony of it, right? And in the consulting world, I later realized during this process that it's the opposite. Somebody that I got connected when I was trying to make this shift, I started to connect with all my friends who did consulting careers, and I started to connect with the friends of friends, etc. And one day I talked to a very senior recruiter in a consulting business who offered me a mock-up interview. She said, I can help you during this process. I can show you how we do the interviews, etc. So I did that with her. And then she asked me a question, basic question: what type of frameworks do you use in your consulting work? And because I did have consulting style experiences before, even though I didn't work purely as consultant. So she was asking, what type of frameworks do you use? And I honestly didn't know how to answer that question. I was just referring to the structure, how I would structure the things and work on that type of project. And then she made a comment like, when we ask this question to MBA graduates, they talk about things like Porter's 5 forces, those type of popular frameworks, and that makes them look like they know the stuff. And I was realizing, actually, I teach those Porter's 5 forces type of models, frameworks to those MBA students in my business school, but I didn't even claim to be the expert in those, which was a very interesting realization for me. I thought, okay, I need to put myself in that framework of mind that I am actually an expert in all of these topics. And I kept reading and reading. I read a lot of books about what consultants do. I watched a lot of videos on YouTube. I studied, there were study books for case study interviews and those type of things, the change of the process. I literally wanted to understand the day in the life of a consultant. And I did that by asking probably tens of people questions about their consulting lives. So that was really a lot of preparation and mental preparation other than being technically okay. So that's when I really shifted my mindset at some point, and I thought, okay, I'm an expert in all of these topics. I can really deliver consulting projects because it's really about understanding how to solve a problem, structured thinking around that. And by the time I was ready, then all the opportunities started to open up. Before that, my initial months looking into consulting roles, I sent tons of applications to different companies. None of them really considered me. And then when I was ready and they started to consider me, then I started to have better conversations. My challenge was I didn't want to also start from the entry level, and those consulting companies didn't want to hire me at the mid-level either because I didn't have that type of consulting experience. But after shifting that mindset, I was able to persuade them that I have the skills to be a good consultant. I just don't have the experience, but I'll very quickly show success. And I was able to persuade them. I moved to London with an opportunity when Accenture was creating their strategy consulting division. I joined their talent and organization strategy consulting division, which was what brought me to London and to consulting. This was about 8 years ago or so. And since then, everything has been quite interesting in this consultant life. I had a few different opportunities at Accenture. I moved to leadership roles before I left. And then 3 years ago, I joined LHH, and I am currently in this role leading the workforce solutions practice in the UK and Ireland. So that's about my story. I think I covered a lot. Any questions?
Just looking at the chat now, I can't see any at the moment. Barak, there's one on my mind I'd love to ask you. You're published academic. You talked about mastery in that arena. Looking back, is there anything you particularly miss about that part of your life, that part of your career journey?
Good question. I miss a lot, actually. one reason I didn't mind moving to consulting, or I like moving to this, is I love teaching. I always enjoyed teaching. I also love research, but there were parts about the research that felt too slow for me sometimes. But I love teaching. But my current job, focusing on more leadership development and coaching, gives me that opportunity to be in front of audiences and teach. So that is the part I don't necessarily miss. But the other part I didn't expect I would miss that much is that flexibility now. Back then when I moved, I thought, I don't mind if I have less flexibility or not, I just want to grow. Now I value that even more. That flexibility in academic life was really good. When I wasn't teaching during the summer holidays, if I didn't have to teach, I could work from anywhere, anytime. And even on the beach, I could just go and do my research, right? I didn't have to be even connected to internet sometimes. I could just have the articles I'm reading. So that flexibility was amazing. I missed that. Now our careers are also, after the pandemic especially, I think we have quite a lot of flexibility also how we work, where we work. But at the moment, I need to be connected quite a lot. So that flexibility, I think I will always miss somehow in academia.
You sound like an early pioneer for hybrid working. Work isn't where you go, it's what you do.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Barak. That was great, and yeah, very, very different challenges. So before we hear from Nigel, whose story is very different again, and really talking about completely reinventing, as Nigel will tell you shortly, I'm not sure that you can have a change in your career almost that's as clear as Nigel has made. So that's it's an exciting story. Let's have another quick poll. If you were going to embark on a completely new career, what would be your biggest challenge? Would it be starting from scratch all over again? The fear of failure? Maybe feeling like an outsider with new challenges? Learning a new skill? Or having to build your reputation? Let's just quickly. So I think I'm right in saying that everybody on the call, on the session, can see the poll as it's. So yeah, some interesting responses. We'll wait for a few more responses to come through. Give it a minute. So yeah, what seems to be coming through there is definitely the fear of failure is a real, very natural, I think. I think we all feel that regardless of whether we change. And that point to what Barak was saying, that he didn't want to start at the bottom again. So starting from scratch again, and linked to that, I guess, building a reputation in a brand new field. So let's hear from Nigel, who pretty much did all of those things and more, and listen to his career story. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you, Karis, and thank you, Barak. Just looking at those results there, I think my story links to, I think 45% of people were marked that as starting from scratch again. That's very much my my experience. So I mean, my career journey in a nutshell was non-conventional, as I see it. So it was very much it was study, then work, then it was career shift, then it was study again, another career shift, and I now look at retirement not as an age, not as a number, but as it's an attitude that I will embrace at some point. So what I'd like to do, what I think I can sort of best do is just give you a potted history of my career moves, my significant career shifts, and just try and highlight some of the key challenges as I remember them, some of the thought processes that I went through, And I'm not saying this is the blueprint for how to best manage a significant career shift. It's really just my personal story about some of the, it's really just observations on some of the decisions and moves that I've made. So to set the context, in my youth and throughout my teens, I was a very keen tennis player. It pretty much dominated my life. I was playing very competitively in the county and beyond. So after leaving school and college, I then essentially became a full-time tennis coach. And it was really just a case of doing what I was good at the time. And I progressed really quite well. I built a really strong practice within my area. I was working about 5 or 6 days a week. And it was all heading in the right direction. But I always knew that I wanted to be able to chart a much longer term career path for myself. Now, the British tennis system at the time, we're talking mid-80s here, was not as strong as it was on continental Europe. If I wanted to pursue my tennis coaching career, I would have to essentially secure a role in, now I knew Germany had a particularly strong setup. I was targeting a coach player role at one of their mid-ranking clubs. And that was a full-time salaried role. So everything was leading to that point. Parallel with this, I was also making applications to join the Royal Marines. I was motivated by the outdoors. I was naturally inspired by keeping fit. So it seemed like a natural channel for me. I went through lots of different selections. I had a knee injury and a knee operation in amongst this. And about 2 or 3 years later, I built my coaching practice to a point where I made a successful application and I had a job offer in one hand to join as a full-time salaried coach a club in Germany, and I had my military sign-up papers in the other hand. And I was a young man. I was very, very early 20s. I was sat on the end of my bed thinking, which direction do I go in? And it was a huge dilemma, probably one that wasn't properly ready for. And I remember that my thought process at the time was, when I'm 65, and again, I know that's kind of irrelevant now, but at the time I thought, when I'm 65 and retire, and I look back on my career, I want to be really proud of what I've achieved and what I've done. And that motivation drew me towards the military career. Now, I know I would have been really satisfied having spent so long in the world of tennis to have secured a full-time role, but it was a bigger motivating factor for me. I was more driven to what I aspired to achieve, and that pride drove me down that road. So I had a huge career tangent, absolute shock to the family and others, and I joined the Marines. I was 21, and I went through all the usual challenges you might expect. So there was the transition from civilian to military, but in one sense it was slightly easier, that part of the challenge, because everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was going from civilian to military. So I was surrounded by people, like-minded people. One of the harder challenges for me was my tennis life was probably centered around quite a slim, thin slither of society, if I'm really frank with myself. When I joined the Marines, I was training and working with people from every possible corner of society. So that whole adaptation, how to relate to, how to communicate with an incredibly diverse range of people, that was part of the kind of the challenge that I went through. Again, massively motivated by my desire to be a part of something that I admired, that it would give me an awful lot of pride. And for me, you needed that in that sort of career shift to overcome some of the really, really challenging, really dark moments of that. So the transition took about took about 9 months, because that's the length of the duration of basic training. And I then joined my unit, and I got stuck into a fabulous military career. As a little bit of an aside, but for context, spent 9 years in total. Midway through, I specialised, and in layman's terms, I was a speedboat driver. So that's that part of the transition and the story. But curiously, again, I reflect back, and I knew, and I was talking to myself early on, I always want to be young enough when I leave to move into something else and to succeed at something else. And I didn't know when that was. I didn't put a date on that. I didn't say I had to move on, retire from that career, move on at a certain age. It was a thought process that I had. And this happened about sort of mid to late 20s. There was a trigger for this, and I was starting to lose control of my own destiny. I was getting posted to roles by the system, by the computer, and I was really wanting more control of my own destiny. So I decided to retire so that I could fulfill that need. I love the Marines, but I was more motivated about putting myself into a career path that I had chosen, not somebody else. So I left the military environment. I was very early 30s. And that first 12 months is probably the biggest challenging moment of my career so far. I mean, it was literally, I would almost describe it as the domestication of Nigel Owen. It was a significant, odd phase of my life. I hopped from one seasonal job to the next, each one lasting only about 2 or 3 months. And I was yearning for, again, a new solid career path where I could see how that was going to look. To achieve this, I went back to study. Went to Bristol, I did a master's degree in human resource management, and that gave me a foundation that the rest of as I saw it, the civilian world would recognize, because looking at my military career, there was very little that people were interested in, or who's had the need in corporate life for someone with a speedboat driving certificate. Just to, okay, slightly sardonic, but just to highlight the point. So that extra period in study again gave me that foundation. Some of the challenges from there, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had a clear path set out in front of me. In the military, the working life, the motivation was all about the mission, the purpose, and the reputation of the organization. I wanted more control of my own destiny, and I didn't mind which role I took, but the challenge I felt was that on the outside world, that model was completely inverted. So it was typically mission and purpose last, it was self first, and that was an enormous kind of challenge for me. And I think even today, my relationship with my career is massively driven by wanting to collaborate with people that I care about, which is my version of how I translate such an attitude-defining career in the Royal Marines. That's what I look for now. So I've gone through some huge challenges. My relationship with my career has gone from just doing what I'm good at, and maybe a little bit about what people expect me to do. It's certainly not what the careers advisors told me at school. They said I should be a fireman, which was the last thing I ever was inspired by. And then massively driven by purpose and mission, not military mission, but the overall, everything associated with the reputation of the Marines, to now it's teamwork, but in a commercial sense. So, Karis, you talked about squiggly careers. I would say my career has been a little bit more squiggly over the last 20 years since leaving the forces. And I mean, that in a nutshell, that is my story. there's no doubt those career shifts, as I've tried to just very quickly explain, have been hugely challenging, but they've also been massively liberating. And to be in control of my own destiny still is an enormous driver for me, regardless of whether there are any future career shifts ahead. So if that's sort of prompted any questions, I'd be very happy to answer those.
Thanks, Nigel. Do we have any questions? Please put any questions you have for Nigel in the chat. I mean, a really fascinating transition, but also I think there's, a comment, I guess, from me. It's actually, in some ways, reflecting and listening to it now, it's actually quite sad, isn't it, that you felt that, coming into a commercial world, that the values were so misaligned. Having worked on that kind of, mission and purpose and care for your colleagues and, a kind of shared goal, that actually moving into the world of commerce, that was so starkly missing. I think that, we can all reflect on that a little bit, and because it's actually, quite sad.
I don't think you can never replicate how, replicate the military world and culture too. It's just totally different, and for all the right reasons. Some of the other challenges I felt were the preconceptions of me as a military man, and perhaps in particular, the Royal Marines, and it's the preconceived ideas about what that meant. So it's probably, again, I just remember it so well. I'm likely unable to be able to think for myself, so only follow orders. I wouldn't be very creative. I wouldn't be very commercial. So these are some of the almost barriers that I came up against. So I do acknowledge making such big career shifts is about being aware that people may not be as clear about the transferable skills. And if I was, if I was mentoring someone else who was leaving right now, absolutely, there will always be transferable skills, and they can have huge impact and value because they are so different. It is about bringing a totally unique perspective into things. So just that, that transferable skill element is something else that struck me.
Thanks, Nigel. We've got some great comments in the chat. What an inspiring story. From Royal Marines and saving lives to the commercial world, really thought-provoking. There was a comment also around that sort of, the destiny and being in control of your own destiny is very much, a driver for what the big reevaluation and potential big resignation might look like. So, lots of really good questions there. And Claire also commenting that she left the NHS as a nurse, and that, surprisingly, people didn't understand that, she had a huge wealth of transferable skills. There's, as you say, there's so many human skills to being a nurse. One quick question that we've got, so I'm just sort of scrolling through and conscious of time, but what do you think, question from Nick, what do you think stops others taking the plunge?
Oh, I don't know. Again, looking back to that poll, I could best answer that in terms of, it's less about what stops you taking the plunge. For me, it's more about being clear on the motivators, what's pulling you towards taking the plunge. And I found that my tennis to military career, the safe option would have been to stick with what I was good at the time. But it was, I think pride is an immensely powerful factor in this. And being pulled towards that by the sense of achievement I knew I would feel was probably overcoming any risks I might have felt. Going again back to the poll, some of the risks, the having to learn a new skill, the time it takes to rebuild your reputation. I mean, that's taken. I've just embraced that because I was the pull towards should be really clear to you. And if it is, it'll override any challenge that you have, I think.
Nigel, I wonder if people also, that for me, that fear of failure, right, in a new career was one of the challenges there. But I was still moving to a related area where I could apply my expertise in consulting world. It wasn't as different as the shift you have made. But even then, I got lots of people telling me, "Are you crazy? You just got your training. What are you doing?" I haven't seen any example of anyone doing it like this, right? So that somehow reinforces that fear of failure. Well, how do I do this? Did you get that a lot? You must have gotten a lot more of those, I guess.
I just remember the quizzical looks when I said I was going to join the military. No history in our family at all, really, anyway. And again, I took motivation from some people saying, "Really? Do you think you can make it?" So there was maybe a little bit of, again, pride, being able to demonstrate that I was more, that there was more to me. And again, leaving the military, it was incredibly physically demanding, but it lacked the cerebral challenge that I was wanting. So again, that was part of the, I just remember what drew me to making no regrets, making really confident, enormous career shifts was what I was pulled towards. So wanting something more cerebral. I think my transition and journey about what it was that I was going to do was a bit clumsy. I didn't have any real direction. I didn't have a mentor. I would change all those things straight away for others if they were in the same boat.
Thank you. I'm really conscious that we're almost at time, and there was a question from Lisa around how to identify strengths. Lisa, we ran a session actually on looking at your own strengths this morning, which has been recorded. So you might find some use and some help from that. So just quickly, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you everyone for your contribution. Really happy, would be really grateful if you could pop your feedback, thoughts, ideas, anything that you'd like to share with us in the chat over the course of the next minute or so. And just quickly, HR Heroes is continuing to run today and tomorrow, so do feel free to sign up for the sessions. In particular, we're super excited to have Gary Hamill on a session, our keynote session tomorrow afternoon. So really hoping for some groundbreaking thought leadership from him. And then I'm just to close us off, I'm going to share my screen once again, and hopefully just give you a little bit of food for thought around what your next career journey and what the next step in your career journey might be. And we certainly hope that we've given you some food for thought around that today. And please do post your comments in the chat before you leave. But thank you very much.